Originally, I was going to save a Trapper rework video for the 1 year anniversary of my first one. It was my first video to break 1,000 views. It gave me the confidence to continue making discussion content, and looking back on it, because I do rewatch it from time to time, I know I could do it better. I'm far more experienced at the game now, literally having 10 times the amount of hours that I did back then. I've done several more rework videos, and with each one I'm learning more and more how to counterbalance and do everything a little bit cleaner, a little bit smoother, and a little less overbearing. And rewatching it, I can honestly say a lot of the changes I proposed were unnecessary. This isn't a rework video, however. It's going to have a rework segment, but it's not a rework video. This is going to be a video breaking down every argument against giving Trapper the most logical change in order to make him legitimately not terrible. We are going to dispel some myths, make some responses, and hopefully we can all leave the discussion a little bit wiser and a little bit calmer about the situation, because I mean, guys, I'm passionate about discussing Dead by Daylight, but some of you take it a bit too far. To start with, the obvious first step is to explain what's wrong with the Trapper to begin with. We all know the Trapper's power by now. You spawn in holding 2 traps base kit, and 6 other traps, now 8 once the PTB patch goes live, spawn in literal random locations around the map, closed and unavailable until you saunter your lumbering ass over there to pick them up. Without the traps, Trapper is an M1 killer, and I mean that in the most bare bones sense. He has nothing without the traps. No anti-loop, no chase power, no zoning, no mobility, no stealth, no nothing. He has his traps, and that's it. Once the traps are not in his hand, all he has is areas of the map he hopes he can corral survivors to and can trick them into not noticing the contrasting color of traps against literally every other map in the game. Because the Trapper is very reliant on his power, and his power spawns at random locations across the map, the Trapper is the slowest killer in the game. Not walking speed wise, just the slowest to start up and getting value from his power. Trapper requires a lot of foreplanning, much of it needed before you even get into the match. You need to know exactly what your plan is, because he is the only killer who has to collect his power. You cannot change that plan. Oh sure, unless you're running the purple bag add-on, you could theoretically move your entire base of operations somewhere else, but you aren't going to, because doing so will result in a loss every single time. Trapped aside of the map they managed to finish every gen on, well, I guess you have what you have, because even on the smallest of maps, it just doesn't pay you to go find those traps. Pick them up one by one and carry them to a different place. And remember, you can only carry 2 at a time, so if you go with this dumb idea, you're gonna be doing laps. With all of us on the same page and understanding the problems, the solutions are very simple and straightforward. 1. Spawn with every trap in hand. You can reduce the number of traps back down to 8, we don't care about that. 2. When placing a trap after you've ran out of traps, replace the first trap you placed with the most recent placement. This way he's in line with literally every other killer in the game. Trapper is a byproduct from a different era of the game, a time where the game was slow and stealth was far more important. The Trapper worked in this era because that's what the game was. But in the modern day, there's simply no reason for a killer to be handicapped this severely. The Trapper is the only killer who suffers from the problems he suffers from. He has to take so much prep time that you might as well put into his base kit that he corrupts like 5 different gens, because that's the only way he stands a chance. Obviously, that's fucking insane. I'm not seriously suggesting that. I'm just saying that that's what he would need to be on par with every other killer. That's the biggest problem. It's not just that Trapper is the worst killer, because there's always going to be a worse killer. It's the fact that Trapper is so unbelievably bad that he sits lower, leagues lower than every other killer in the game, with his closest competitor being Michael Myers. And Michael Myers isn't that great, because he too is just an M1 killer who requires a lot of setup, but the exposed and stealth aspects of Myers put him leagues ahead of Trapper, and that's one of the biggest issues. Except, according to some people, they think that giving him these changes would be bad. I think the best place to start for sure would be the devs' reason they keep giving for their outright refusal to make a basic and necessary change. 1, they say Trapper's performance is not that bad. Of course he isn't that bad. He's normally played only in low MMRs, and once you get out of those low MMRs, he's practically worthless. The thing you need to understand is that the vast majority of the player base is bad at the game. I've made 2 separate videos about the complications of this game and how outright difficult it is to get into and understand everything there is to know. You need exclusive game sense to play this game well. So someone like Trapper, who relies on survivors making mistakes to make his power work, is of course going to thrive when the vast majority of players make a lot of mistakes, because the vast majority of players do not put enough time, effort, and energy in to get the game sense necessary to understand how to play against the Trapper. Because playing against the Trapper requires you to pay attention to the flow of the match. Where has the Trapper been? There's most likely traps there. When you notice you're playing against Trapper, you need to pay attention to your surroundings. And most people don't even look behind them while they're in chase. What makes you think they're going to be looking at the ground and trying to figure out where his traps are? That's why some people, even when not in chase, will just meander into a trap at lower MMRs. And I understand that some people are probably going to tell me at some point, like, oh, well, if he's this strong in lower MMRs as he is, why would you buff him? And I'll get to that in a little bit. But first, the second reason that the devs say they don't want to make this change is that they want to keep him simple and straightforward, because he's a lot of players' first killers. And I don't buy this for 2 reasons. First off, if that were the case, Trapper would be the only killer new players are allowed to play as and against for X amount of hours or matches. But that isn't the case. You can, as I did when I first started, just bypass the Trapper altogether, buy your favorite killer and just use them. I literally only played Ghostface for my first like 30 hours in the game. I understand he's a lot of people's first killer, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he needs to be this crap. The second reason I think this is bullshit is because the Huntress exists. One of my Discord members actually pointed this out to me. A simple and straightforward killer who's really powerful. And the thing is, we aren't even asking for Trapper to be mega powerful or really powerful. No one's asking behavior to giga buff him into A tier. We just want a simple change that makes the most sense and puts him in line with every other killer in the game. Now, onto some common arguments I've heard from this community, and one that I am expecting to come from this. I mentioned earlier that he's strong at low MMRs because it takes a lot of game sense to go against him. And there are going to be people who are going to ask me, well, if he's strong at low MMRs, then why do you suggest buffing him? Wouldn't that make lower MMR players' lives a little bit harder? Yeah, but I don't really give a shit. The thing about it is that when you exist at low MMRs and you don't have the game sense to pay attention, there is nothing in this game that you're gonna have fun playing against, unless you just have general fun with the game. You know what I mean? Like, if you've got bad game sense, you're gonna go down to fucking Hillbilly a lot. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't buff the Hillbilly and make him not dog shit. Whenever you've got bad game sense, you're going to get tombstoned a lot by Myers. It doesn't mean we shouldn't buff Myers and make him not dog shit. Just because lower MMR players suffer to certain killers doesn't mean we shouldn't still buff them. Because at the end of the day, if it is your game sense that's holding you back and not the power of the killer, that's not everybody else's problem. You need to get better game sense if you want to play against these killers. And that sounds harsh, that sounds gatekeepy, but that's just the way it is. If you don't have good game sense, we should not be coddling you. Get better game sense, or just play the game without better game sense and accept the fact that you're going to die to like every killer you come across. Now, on to common arguments I've heard. The first one is spawning with every trap will just make a bunch of basement trappers. And to that I say, so what? The traps are easy to spot, easy to disarm, and if the trapper is just camping basement with all his traps there, oh well, GG's, go next. It's the same as basement Bubba. What are you gonna do? But to be honest, basement trapper is only played because it's the only viable build to the man. Giving him more viability by making him not hunt the world over will cause people to enter more playstyles. Right now, the only reason purple bag trapper users do basement trapper is because the add-on is limited, and that's the only thing they know. They don't have enough opportunities to fiddle around with it and figure out what works more often. And the other thing about it is that basement trapper is just more fun. You knock somebody down with like iron grasp and agitation, and then you see if you can carry them from one end of the map to the other. That's the most fun part about it. But basement trapper is a bad strategy. You guys do know that, right? It's just like face camping. It's a terrible strategy. And the only thing that makes it work is pure uncoordinated altruism. But if you see Trapper camping the basement with a bunch of traps, you just leave that person and go crank gens. You will win. People have done it to me on multiple occasions, is specifically, again, the higher an MMR in game sense you go. But again, even if this started a certain surge of Basement Trapper, much like playing against Trapper normally, all you need to do to counter Basement Trapper is pay attention. 2. Trapper spawning with every trap will let him create a 3-gen setup. No, it fucking won't. First off, what exactly is in place now to stop that from happening? People who run Purple Bag do not do 3-gen setups for the same reason people who play Hag don't do 3-gen setups. Because without Call of Brine Overcharge or Eruption setup, trying an early 3-gen isn't viable. It's just not. And now that that perk setup has been nerfed into the ground, nobody with a brain cell is going to run it. But also, if you really wanted to run 3-gen Trapper, what's stopping you? Throw on Corrupt so the 3-gen can't get broken. Go grab your traps and have it set up. You think it'll work well for you? It really fucking won't. Hell, speaking of the Hag, she would be a better 3-gen killer than Trapper with all his traps. Her traps have a larger trigger range. You can do more hit and runs, harass people off gens. What's the Trapper going to do? Cry as 4 of his traps get disabled simultaneously in 4 different areas, and he has to choose to dedicate himself to a hopeless chase while the other 3 knuckleheads crank the gens? Someone said Bloody Coils and Eerie Stone would make this strategy work, but I feel like every time someone brings up Eerie add-ons as a counter, they seem to forget how rare double Eerie actually is. And how, yeah, I guess, but not really. Like, even if you're injuring everybody who's disabling the traps, they can't go further than injured. So again, 4 people disable or 3 people disable random traps on 3 different generators, or they just ignore the traps altogether because it doesn't really matter because the traps are not that powerful. They are very tiny. They have a very precise hitbox. You can place 3 freaking traps around each gen, but that's not going to do much unless the gens are only accessible from one angle. You're not stopping anybody from working on the gens. And because especially, and I don't know if a lot of you know this, you can't place a trap right next to a gen. It has to be a certain distance from it. And that certain distance it has to be from it just so happens to be just small enough for a survivor to wiggle into the gap and work on the generator. So no. And finally, the third common complaint I hear is that Trapper could not get this buff because some killers just have to be bad. Not every killer can be S or A tier. And this change would not remotely bring him to close to A or S tier. Hell, it wouldn't even get him above C. His traps are still bad and easy to counter. Unless we gave the man like 12 to 15 traps, him having all 8 just simply isn't enough to propel him any further. He will still have a long setup time, just not as near as bad as before, because unlike other trap killers, Freddy, Hag, and I think I can count Singularity in this, Trapper's traps have small hitboxes and don't have a radius to trigger them. There's nothing he can do if someone triggers a trap across the map. And most of the time, people will just be disarming traps because they are so easy to see, or they'll avoid them altogether because, again, for like the 50th time, they are too small to matter. The trap hitboxes are not that big. They have to be placed in very certain angles and positions in order to be remotely viable, and they're still not that viable most of the time. In order for Trapper to climb the tier, so much would have to be done. So much that nobody is asking for. Look, at the end of the day, Trapper's viability is important because he's most people's first killer. He needs to not be miserable to play, and eventually new trappers will feel the sting of not having a power, wondering what else they're supposed to do when they constantly hear their traps being disabled across the map. Trapper has the potential to be so much more. I've said this before, but the true chess-playing killer is Trapper. The sheer amount of strategy and brain power that goes into cleverly hiding traps, learning how to corral survivors to them, mastering map knowledge and theory is lost when you have to play Peter fucking Cottontail collecting your own power like a dunce. Quit making bad excuses for Trapper not getting all of his traps when every other killer with much more effective traps can have them, and the excuses you mentioned don't apply to those killers. But that's it for the video, guys. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch and listen. Remember, it's okay to disagree with me or others. What's not okay is throwing around homophobic insults and directly attacking people's appearances. I've started seeing more of this 14-year-old argumentation as the video grows cropping up in my comments, and I won't tolerate it. And a special thank you to my channel members Spirit Upgrades and Nuclear Bomb for supporting me in my journey to become a full-time content creator. If you guys weren't interested in how to get special thank yous at the end of videos, as well as other perks like teasers for upcoming upcoming content, discount codes, and more, please check out the join button below the video. I really appreciate it. And finally, don't forget, you only have one more week to use code BIRDMOMMY at checkout of my merch store for 10% off your entire purchase. Other than that, I love you all, and I'll see you in the next one.